Hey guys, I'm Andrew the Geek Master, and in today's video, we're going to see Hargaan, the son of Zeus, facing off against YuWon, the man using a system to become a god and take down all the gods who destroyed his world. I'll drop the link to the playlist with all the videos in the cards and in the pinned comment. To make sure you don't miss stories like this, hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and let's get started. In the last video, we saw our protagonist, YuWon, had just defeated a mega-boss all by himself and was found by Hargaan's team, the son of Zeus. YuWon was standing on top of a mountain of centipede corpses, including the boss's body that was dozens of meters long. His eyes were glowing with a terrifying red aura, and here we get a flashback of YuWon taking down that boss. The monster with hundreds of legs was commonly referred to as a parasite dragon in the tower. Despite its insect-like appearance, it was extremely hard to kill. Because of that, YuWon took almost 30 minutes to win the fight. Even so, thanks to this, he was able to level up and gain more strength, dexterity, and arcane points. YuWon gained a lot from defeating this boss. Besides leveling up, he got to use his full arsenal of abilities, which allowed him to get a proper understanding of his current combat power. After defeating the parasite dragon, he completed his second objective for this dungeon. And on top of that, an unexpected bonus came up. The completion rate of the heaven-slaying star ability went up by 1%. That's when YuWon realized that instead of killing tons of monsters, he had to focus on taking down bosses to complete this ability. Back to the present, YuWon, sitting on top of the giant centipede's corpse, watched several participants enter the boss room, and with complete nonchalance, he told them they were late. Everyone was shocked by the state of the boss room, which was honestly a pretty normal reaction. There were hundreds of dead centipedes, not to mention the giant boss's corpse that looked like a dragon. The room was full of surprises. Seeing this, Sung-yoon wondered if Hargaan, the strongest person in this tutorial, could have taken down this boss alone. So he asked if YuWon was alone, and when our protagonist confirmed, Sung-yoon understood that the beast caged in front of him would be dangerous if they weren't on the same team. He even invited YuWon to join the group, leaving everyone silently staring at him, waiting for his answer to Sung-yoon's offer. YuWon started looking at each of them, realizing this was Hargaan's team when he noticed Elidor was there, as they had climbed the tower together in a previous life, at least in the early stages. YuWon looked at them like an adult watching kids growing big and strong. He focused closely on Yolche, who was just behind Hargaan in rank, and realized she was important in this tutorial. While he admitted they were all good companions with bright potential, YuWon once again declined the offer. Sung-yoon slowly nodded, already expecting this answer since YuWon had rejected Hargaan's offer before. Yolche took it further. Understanding that YuWon planned to fight Baraganda, the boss of the island, alone, she suggested they team up to face him, as the boss was designed for that purpose. And she was right. The final tutorial's focus is teams. A boss that no single person could defeat, a month to get stronger, and no restrictions. It was a stage where a team was supposed to defeat a boss that no individual could take down on their own. Before our protagonist could even respond, suddenly a loud noise echoed, and the ground shook slightly. Someone was coming. Turns out Elidor contacted the captain and said they had found YuWon, meaning this is about to get messy. And indeed, at that moment, a series of golden lightning bolts flashed past Sung-yoon. He was surprised for a second by the mild shock. Hargaan leapt straight toward YuWon. He was the guy he'd been looking for all this time. There was no way the hot-headed Hargaan would just stand still. This encounter was not going to be peaceful. However, the moment Hargaan got close to YuWon, his vision suddenly went dark because YuWon's hand was already on his face. And as if that wasn't enough, suddenly, Hargaan was flying backward. Whatever he was thinking, his train of thought was quickly interrupted as YuWon slammed him into the ground using Hargaan's own momentum. Everything happened in a flash, and Sung-yoon and the rest of the group were left speechless. YuWon acted like nothing had happened and asked Yolche if they simply wanted to survive or if they wanted to become rankers. Yolche was surprised by those words because YuWon, who wasn't a pure blood, knew about the existence of rankers. People who had prevailed in all the tower's trials and cleared all its floors, these individuals were rankers. With fame, authority, and the power of immortality, every player wanted to become a ranker so they could possess any mystical item within the tower. Despite that, YuWon had no interest in it. I mean, eventually, he would have to become a ranker, but that was just part of the process. Yolche was baffled by YuWon's response. She even widened her eyes because the king who leads her people is also a respected ranker. Yet here was YuWon, a guy who had never climbed the tower, seeming to have such an unreal dream. He didn't just want to become a high ranker, no, he wanted to climb even higher. He pointed upward with his finger, revealing that his ultimate goal wasn't something like being a ranker, a high ranker, or even reaching the top of the tower. Instead, he declared that he would break through the ceiling of this tower. This left everyone, especially Yolche, even more shocked, as breaking the tower's ceiling was something she had never even imagined. However, this conversation was interrupted when Hargaan stood up, growing like a beast, glaring at YuWon and asking why he attacked him. YuWon simply replied that Hargaan came at him with such force that he thought he was trying to kill him. With someone as strong as Hargaan charging at him, it was only natural for him to be scared. After hearing YuWon's answer, Hargaan scratched his head and nodded in agreement. He even apologized for it, which was a pretty surprising reaction for YuWon. The truth is, Hargaan was fascinated by this idea of breaking through the tower's ceiling. He had already heard from his father about how there was a greater power outside the tower. It was clear that he was immensely proud of his father, which wasn't surprising because his father was Zeus, king of Olympus and one of the greatest rankers. With power rivaling that of an administrator, he was one of the few beings capable of controlling the massive tower. Hargaan understood that YuWon refused to join the team because a sardine can't swim with a whale, but to ensure that YuWon didn't see him as a little fish, Hargaan promised that one day he would become the king of Olympus. That statement caught YuWon's attention because for a descendant of Olympus to say that, he really had to be quite bold. To prove he wasn't joking, Hargaan proposed a bet to see who could defeat the boss first and gather more points. YuWon could form a team with dozens or even hundreds of people, but they would try to do it with just a group of 9 members. If Hargaan won, YuWon would be forced to join his team, but if YuWon won, Hargaan would serve him like a brother. YuWon wasn't too thrilled about this since he didn't need a little brother, but he was certainly interested in Hargaan because his goal was to change the future, and Hargaan might be a very useful card against that event. So he suggested that if he won, Hargaan would have to help him with one thing whenever he needed it. Hargaan quickly agreed, radiating with confidence. He seemed very certain that he would win, no matter what. Hargaan couldn't stop laughing from excitement as he clapped his fists together. He even asked YuWon not to pretend he didn't know him when they met on the tower's first floor. YuWon still couldn't stand how loud Hargaan was, but maybe that's how he managed to finish the tutorial in just 9 days in his previous life. Hargaan quickly addressed the team, saying they had a lot to do and little time to do it. But he was also caught off guard when YuWon said they didn't need to rush so much. No one understood what he meant until YuWon pointed out the time and revealed that, for a moment, time would freeze. None of them expected this, including Hargaan, who didn't understand why the timer had stopped. It was at this moment that YuWon revealed Baranganda wasn't an island. It was actually a mythical beast. Yes, the tutorial was taking place on the back of a giant creature as large as a small country. Hearing YuWon's explanation made Hargaan take another look at the centipede-like monsters' bodies scattered across the ground, and he realized they were parasites. They had latched on to the great beast and were draining its strength. Baranganda couldn't take it anymore, which is why it decided to submerge itself, as the seawater would dehydrate the parasites. Hargaan wasn't sure whether to believe what YuWon was saying. This was something even Olympus didn't know. So how could a mysterious tutorial participant know all this? Either way, YuWon said that time would remain frozen until an administrator or a minion intervened with the system. Now, we get a flashback to when YuWon had a conversation with Odin in the past. Odin explained to him that the fifth tutorial was a race against time. It's a matter of defeating the boss with as much time left as possible. Everyone knows that Odin defeated the boss within a week, but it wasn't a real week. Odin's big secret was that he had managed to stop time, a secret he revealed to our protagonist. Back in the present, YuWon knew he needed to make good use of this time, and once he grew stronger and time resumed, he would finish the tutorial. Meanwhile, one by one, the tutorial participants began to notice that time had stopped. The participants understood that they needed to get back to hunting. Within the time limit, they had to level up and gain as many points as possible. At the same time, the administrator's minions were shocked to discover that someone had killed the parasite dragon, a feat no one had accomplished since Odin. The minions needed the administrator to fix the tutorial's time freeze, but the problem was that the administrator was currently engaged in an argument with Olympus and was too busy because of it. Elsewhere, a loud noise shook the forest, and a flock of birds flew into the sky to escape the heat that had enveloped the area. A large orc fell to the ground after being struck by our protagonist's sword, causing a horde of red orcs to slowly back away, trying to retreat. They were so scared they started fleeing, calling our protagonist a monster. And indeed, YuWon, who had drawn his sword, made it clear he was at an absolutely powerful level. As the few surviving orcs began to run away in a hurry, YuWon expressed his disapproval amid the chaos. Normally, he would have chased the orcs, but now wasn't the time for that because the time limit had started counting again. With that, YuWon managed to gain about 4 days before time resumed. It was more than he had expected, and he knew that to break the tutorial again, he would need more than just hunting the parasite dragon. In any case, YuWon began heading toward the top of the island to the tower where the gods live. At the top of Baranganda, there was a deep crater. It was the trial where you had to defeat the boss within a month and earn points, and every skilled participant wanted to be the one to defeat it. Sungwoon and Elidor looked at the participants who had started gathering around the crater. Sungyoon, who had the highest sensitivity to mana in the group, with his high arcane power, sensed the participants around them and murmured that some of them seemed quite strong. Yolche also noticed that some of them were above level 20. After all, they had made it this far, and you needed to be at least that level to enter the tower. But many of them weren't even worth mentioning. She couldn't believe that participants with such weak skills were trying to face the boss. The tutorial boss was a creature that could never be defeated by people like them. Yolche herself wasn't sure if even they would be able to win, but she hinted that it would depend on how strong Hargaan was. And indeed, there was a group of 5 people climbing the mountain. This group was led by Hargaan, who stood out with his blonde hair. They were late, but it was clear the group was making the most of their time. As for YuWon, well, Elidor, who was watching the crowd, warned everyone that he was coming. And indeed, there came YuWon climbing the mountain, quickly realizing that Hargaan's group continued to hunt in 2 separate teams. He could feel the flow of mana from Elidor, and Sungyoon had changed. They must have leveled up several times because the flow of mana they radiated was much denser. They had all changed in just a few days, and Hargaan, their leader, was no exception. As soon as they met, Hargaan broke into a big smile, as if he had already won the bet and as if they were great friends. But Hargaan was perplexed to see that YuWon hadn't formed a team and kept insisting he would win anyway. Hargaan was filled with greed as he looked at YuWon. Over the last 4 days, while the time limit was frozen, he had tried his best to catch up to YuWon. However, the difference between them had only increased, a gap of more than 7,000 points. To turn the leaderboard around, Hargaan's only option was to earn more points in the process of defeating the boss, all with the goal of recruiting YuWon for his team and completing the tutorial in first place. At that moment, several participants began to approach YuWon. They were careless and bold, making attempts to recruit our protagonist to defeat the boss. But none of them seemed skilled enough. Thinking that YuWon would join a different team, Hargaan started to radiate electricity in anger. It was fine with him if YuWon formed his own team, but his pride wouldn't let him stand by and watch him join someone else's team. The participants, having faced his fury a few times before, quickly moved away from YuWon. And thanks to Hargaan scaring off the pests for him, YuWon started to walk. As YuWon moved away, Hargaan stopped gathering electricity in his palm. After realizing that YuWon was heading toward the boss's crater, Hargaan understood that time within the tutorial was more valuable than gold. He even began to celebrate, thinking that thanks to YuWon, they would complete the 5th tutorial in 5 days. YuWon was purely focused. He was finally in front of the crater. As soon as he took a step inside, his whole body was sucked into the crater. The system soon informed him that he had entered the hall of the first boss. A large and deep cave spread out before YuWon's eyes. This place was similar to the underground dungeon where he killed the parasite dragon. This was the boss's hall. But to find the true boss, there were some obstacles he had to overcome first. Several monsters emerged from the cave: acid snakes, earth eels, lizard men, orc warriors, and goblin warriors. Some of these hostile monsters, which normally wouldn't stay together, were all staring at YuWon. This was something that would normally be impossible, but not on this island. Hargaan and his companions, who entered after YuWon, looked on in fascination at the monsters blocking their path. They didn't seem too worried because, for them, an army of monsters of this caliber was not a significant obstacle. They were the strongest in this tutorial. YuWon knew that all these monsters were together because that guy could control them. The good news was that YuWon already knew where the boss would be. He immediately began to walk toward the monster's shield formation, combining his arcane sword with colossal fire. Finally having the chance to see YuWon's abilities, Hargaan's companions stood still and watched. Even Hargaan, who was always the first to charge into battle, crossed his arms and watched YuWon take the front line, as if signaling for YuWon to go and do his thing, and as if trying to confirm their expectations. However, after taking a few steps in a flash, YuWon simply vanished. The group lost sight of YuWon. One of the few who managed to keep up with YuWon's movements was Sung-yoon. He saw YuWon disappear and land on the heads of the monsters. The scarlet arcane sword began to fly among the orcs, goblins, and lizard men. The monsters groaned in pain as the scarlet storm raged around them. The fierce heat burned their flesh, and each time the sword gleamed, multiple heads fell. In just a few seconds, a path opened between the orcs and goblins blocking the way. Yes, in an instant, YuWon had penetrated the monsters' defenses and committed a massacre with just one sword, making Sung-yoon realize that YuWon was even more monstrous than the captain. Sung-yoon looked to the side, startled. Fortunately, Hargaan didn't seem to care about what Sung-yoon had said about him. On the contrary, he was smiling, very excited. Electricity began to gather around Hargaan's fists. He could no longer just stand still watching. The electricity in his fists made an explosive sound, and Hargaan stepped forward. Then, just like YuWon, Hargaan vanished in an instant. At that moment, The orcs' weapons shattered into pieces, and the acid snakes crawling on the ground were torn apart. This was the power of Hargaan's electric attacks. Just the two of them were enough to take down all the monsters, but the others knew that if they did nothing, they would be left behind. This was the unchangeable rule of the New World, which they had experienced since the first tutorial. So, Sung-Yoon began to conjure his mana explosion. Yolche drew her two swords, and the elf brothers prepared their spirits and spells. YuWon looked at the people following him and nodded. Excluding Hargaan, YuWon doubted their abilities. He was worried that these people would die in what was about to happen. Being quite impatient, Hargaan was at the forefront. After passing through all the traps, a large door could be seen from afar. It was an old door that looked to be at least 10 meters high. Once he reached the front of the door, Hargaan waited for YuWon and his group. Hargaan looked at the paintings on the giant door. Orcs, goblins, lizardmen, kobolds, gnolls, ogres, countless decapitated monsters. Above the door, confusing hieroglyphs were inscribed. YuWon dusted off the door, thinking that guy was behind it. Although they shared the same destination, YuWon wasn't exactly part of Hargaan's group, not to mention that Hargaan and he had made a bet on who would defeat the boss first. So, when Hargaan turned his head, he saw that YuWon was already opening the door, as he was originally supposed to enter alone. At that moment, the scream of a monster echoed. Alarmed by the scream, Hargaan stopped talking and turned to look at the open door. There was nothing but pure darkness inside, but it wasn't just the darkness that surprised Hargaan. The scream was terrifying, and its presence alone sent chills down their spines, making Hargaan and the others tremble. Hargaan swallowed hard. He knew the identity of the boss, but this would be the first time he would face it directly. Hargaan gathered electricity in his hands to illuminate a bit, and in the center of the dome-shaped cave was the source of the screams. The boss was trapped behind giant steel bars, and its appearance was horrifying. It looked like a disgusting mix of orc, goblin, ogre, and other races. The face resembled various monsters. Its body was that of an ogre, the legs of an orc, and its tail belonged to a lizard man. On its back were black wings from an unknown beast. The monster stood at least 10 meters tall and was a chimera. Except for YuWon and Hargaan, the rest of the group took a few steps back, unable to handle the pressure of the boss. The chimera before them was a monster that did not naturally exist in the tutorial, similar to Surutra. That's why it was the final boss of the tutorial, and why it required the help of hundreds of thousands of participants to defeat it. The system soon sent messages confirming that this was the boss, and that the mission would be completed upon its defeat. But this time, the system also sent the following messages. The person who breaks the seal of the chimera will transform it into their familiar. If the sealing crystal is broken, the time limit will end, and they will be able to pass the tutorial regardless of the requirements. And the master of the chimera will receive additional points for each participant they kill. Next to the cell in which the chimera was trapped, there was a staff glowing red-black. At the top of the staff was a crystal emitting light. This was probably the sealing crystal that had been mentioned. In short, if this crystal were broken, the chimera would be freed. The test would be much more complicated if there were more participants, but only 10 people were in the boss room now. That wasn't a large number to keep an eye on each other's movements. And even if any of them tried to do something, there was a force called Hargaan that would be hard to overcome. YuWon immediately set off toward the crystal. Before he knew it, Hargaan had caught up behind him and grabbed his shoulder tightly. The bet between YuWon and Hargaan was about who would kill the boss first or who would score the most points. This meant that for the bet to be resolved, one of them would have to kill the boss. However, if the sealing crystal were broken, the participant who broke it could control the chimera as a familiar. Moreover, they wouldn't be able to bet on who would kill the boss first anymore. But YuWon assured him that he would still win the bet. Even with Hargaan holding him back, he raised one of his hands, and before anyone noticed, he was holding a sword from his inventory. Then he threw his sword and shattered the ceiling crystal. As the chains of the chimera broke and it was completely freed, the system announced that Kim YuWon was the master of the chimera. Hargaan felt as if he had just been betrayed by a companion. However, what YuWon did next was not what he expected. YuWon ordered the chimera to break that wall, and having been released from its prison, the chimera crashed into the wall, shaking the entire cave. In that moment, a new cave was revealed to everyone's surprise, and although Hargaan didn't fully trust YuWon, our protagonist assured them that the chimera wouldn't attack them because he was the one controlling it now. However, YuWon said that from now on, he would face a different enemy. The chimera was a monster created by combining several monsters from this island, but the question was, who created this chimera? Hargaan's eyes widened at YuWon's question. He looked at the wall that the chimera had just broken. If the chimera were the true boss and there was no additional phase, this new cave wouldn't exist. But there was definitely a new path, and YuWon began to walk toward the new cave with the chimera. It was an unexpected situation. The message clearly stated to kill the chimera. It was the boss of the tutorial, and they were the participants who had to defeat it. However, the situation became very confusing, so Hargaan and his group followed YuWon to check what was happening. Inside the broken wall, there was a long tunnel, and inside it were what appeared to be parts of human bodies hanging everywhere. YuWon continued walking through the tunnel with his chimera. The end of the tunnel didn't seem far off. It led to a long cave filled with torches, and suddenly the system notified him that he had arrived at Boss Hall number 4. With that, YuWon spotted a large table and a very thin man working on something with blood on his hands. The man stood up from his chair. His face was as gaunt as his body. He must not have seen the sun in a long time. His skin was very pale, contrasting with his black cloak. This was the creator of chimeras, and the system quickly updated the mission to defeat the creator of chimeras. So, we'll wrap up this video, but please comment on what you think of this story and the partnership between YuWon and Hargaan. To see the continuation, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and leave a like to help us out. Thank you for watching, and until the next adventure.